I'm Emily, 35 years old, and I never imagined my own family would orchestrate such an elaborate scheme to steal my home. Sitting in my attorney's office 3 weeks after the nightmare began, I watched as he reviewed the stack of documents I'd brought him. His expression shifted from professional concern to confusion. Then suddenly he burst into laughter. I sat frozen, bewildered by his reaction to my family crisis. He turned his computer screen toward me, pointing at something that made my jaw drop. "Your family just made the biggest mistake of their lives," he said, still chuckling. Before I continue this story about how my family's greed led to their own downfall, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's dealt with family members trying to take advantage of you? Please hit that like button if you believe family should support, not exploit each other, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal. Let's dive into how this all started when my golden child brother's perfect life came crashing down. My brother Jake had always been the family's shining star. At 38, he lived in a massive suburban house, drove luxury cars, and sent his 3 kids to the most expensive private school in the state. Our parents, Dorothy and Robert, never missed an opportunity to brag about their successful son while barely acknowledging my existence. That changed dramatically when Jake lost his high-paying tech job 3 weeks ago. The panic in our mother's voice was palpable when she called me that Tuesday evening. "Emily, we need to have a family meeting immediately. Jake's in trouble." I should have recognized the calculating tone beneath her concern, but I was still naive enough to believe family meant something. I arrived at my parents' house to find Jake slumped on their couch, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His wife Brittany sat beside him, designer purse clutched tightly, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Jake's been let go from his position," my father announced gravely. "The mortgage payments on their house are astronomical. If they can't refinance soon, they'll lose everything." I expressed my sympathy, genuinely feeling bad, despite Jake's years of treating me like a second-class sibling. That's when my mother dropped the first hint of their true intentions. "You know, Emily, you're so fortunate that grandmother left you that house free and clear. Not everyone in the family has been so blessed. I owned my modest 3-bedroom home outright, thanks to inheriting it from my grandmother 5 years ago, plus using all my savings to renovate it. It wasn't fancy like Jake's McMansion, but it was mine. Family helps family." My father added his tone, suggesting this wasn't just a statement, but an expectation. The meeting continued with increasingly less subtle hints about my responsibility to help. Then Dorothy presented her proposal. "We've consulted with a financial advisor. If you temporarily transfer your deed to Jake, he can use it as collateral to refinance his mortgage at a much better rate. It's just paperwork, really. Once he's back on his feet, everything goes back to normal." The room fell silent as everyone waited for my response. Jake suddenly perked up, adding, "It would just be for a few months, Em. Think about my kids. They'd have to change schools if we lose the house." I asked for time to think about it, which clearly wasn't the answer they expected. My mother's face hardened. "Time, your brother needs help now, not when it's convenient for you." The guilt trip had begun. Over the next few days, their campaign intensified dramatically. My phone rang constantly with calls from both parents, each conversation more manipulative than the last. Mother would cry about her grandchildren's suffering while father lectured me about family loyalty and how selfish I was being. The real shock came when Brittany started her social media campaign. Posts about family betrayal and choosing money over blood began appearing on her Facebook and Instagram. Though she never mentioned my name directly, everyone in our extended family knew who she meant. The comments section filled with relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all expressing disappointment in whoever would let families struggle while sitting on resources. My cousin Lisa, one of the few relatives I actually trusted, called me with disturbing news. "Emily, you need to know something. I overheard Jake at the casino last month. He's in deep with some serious gambling debts. This isn't just about his mortgage." When I confronted my parents with this information, they immediately dismissed it. Lisa has always been jealous of Jake's success. "Don't believe such vicious rumors," my mother snapped. The situation reached a boiling point when they issued their ultimatum during another family meeting. Either you transfer the deed by the end of this week, or you're no longer welcome in this family, my father declared. We've given you everything, supported you your whole life, and this is how you repay us, by watching your brother lose everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd barely acknowledged my existence unless they needed something, while Jake had been showered with every opportunity and advantage. My refusal to immediately comply with their demands triggered an escalation I never could have anticipated. The first public humiliation came at my workplace. I was in the middle of presenting a quarterly report when the receptionist interrupted, looking flustered. "Emily, your mother is here and she's quite upset." I excused myself to find Dorothy in the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear, proclaiming that I was a heartless daughter who would rather see family homeless than share my unearned inheritance. My coworkers tried to pretend they weren't watching as she ranted about how I'd always been jealous of Jake, how I was using this situation to finally get revenge for imagined slights. "You sit in that house your grandmother gave you, probably laughing at your brother's misfortune," she accused, tears streaming dramatically. Security eventually escorted her out, but the damage was done. My boss pulled me aside later, expressing concern about the disruption. I'd worked there for 8 years without incident, and now I was the subject of office gossip. That night, things escalated further. Around 11 p.m., loud banging on my front door jolted me from sleep. Jake's slurred voice carried through the neighborhood as he shouted accusations. "You think you're better than me because Grandma felt sorry for you. Open this door and face me like family should." The alcohol on his breath was evident even from inside. He kicked the door repeatedly, screaming about losing his house while I lived like a queen in mine. My neighbor Carol called the police while I huddled in my bedroom listening to my brother's increasingly incoherent rants. When officers arrived, Jake immediately changed tactics. "Officers, thank God you're here. My sister has stolen from our family. She's holding property that belongs to all of us." I had to show the police my deed and explain the situation. They warned Jake about public intoxication and disturbing the peace, but he'd planted seeds of doubt with some neighbors who'd overheard his claims. The psychological warfare intensified the next morning. I came home from grocery shopping to find my entire front lawn covered in boxes and plastic bins. My parents had cleared out every trace of my existence from their house, dumping it all on my property. Baby photos, yearbooks, childhood artwork, holiday decorations I'd made in elementary school, stuffed animals from my youth, all scattered across the wet grass as rain began to fall. Years of memories turning to soggy pulp, while neighbors walked by whispering. I was gathering the salvageable items when Brittany's car pulled up. She emerged with all 3 children, who immediately ran to me crying. "Aunt Emily, please don't make us leave our house." The youngest sobbed, clearly coached. "Mommy says we'll have to live in our car because you won't help Daddy." Brittany stood back, filming the entire scene on her phone. "I just want Emily to see the faces of the children she's destroying," she announced, loud enough for the gathering neighbors. The manipulation of those innocent kids broke my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about helping family anymore. It was about control and greed. As I gently told the children that everything would be okay and tried to explain that adult problems weren't their fault, Brittany yanked them away. "Don't listen to her lies, babies. Some people only care about money." Extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years began reaching out, all with the same message: disappointment in my selfishness. My invitation to my cousin Marie's wedding was rescinded via a cold text. "We've decided to keep the celebration limited to family who understand what that word means." The isolation tactics were clearly coordinated. Anonymous numbers began texting threats and insults at all hours. "Karma will get you for what you're doing to Jake." "Hope that house is worth losing everyone who ever cared about you." The final straw came when Jake took to social media himself, posting a long, rambling message about his concerns for my mental health. He suggested that I'd become paranoid and delusional since grandmother's death, that I was seeing conspiracies where family was just trying to help. He even mentioned considering having me evaluated for my own safety. Friends who knew me well saw through it, but acquaintances began asking if I was okay if I needed someone to talk to about my issues. After the social media attack and threats of mental health evaluations, I knew I needed professional help. A colleague recommended Michael Chen, an attorney specializing in family property disputes and financial fraud. Sitting in his office that first day, I felt embarrassed laying out the family drama, but his expression grew increasingly serious as I detailed each incident. This isn't just family pressure, Emily. This is coordinated harassment with likely criminal intent. Let me do some investigating. What Attorney Chen uncovered over the next week shattered any remaining illusions about my family's motivations. He started with public records and Jake's financial history. Your brother owes approximately $200,000 in gambling debts, some to legitimate casinos, others to less official creditors. He reported sliding documents across his desk. The paper trail showed a pattern of borrowing, losing, and desperately borrowing more dating back 2 years. But here's where it gets interesting, Chen continued. Jake didn't just lose his job, he was terminated for embezzlement. The company is pressing charges, but he's been hiding this from everyone. The termination letter clearly stated cause misappropriation of company funds exceeding $50,000. Jake had been stealing from his employer to feed his gambling addiction, and when caught, tried to frame a junior colleague. The investigation revealed my parents weren't innocent victims of their son's troubles either. Chen discovered they'd known about Jake's debts for months and had already leveraged their own home to help him. They're underwater too, he explained. They need your house as collateral for a consolidated loan that would bail everyone out. But knowing and planning were two different things, and what came next proved the premeditation. I found something particularly disturbing, Chen said during our next meeting. He showed me incorporation documents for an LLC created just 1 week before Jake allegedly lost his job. The LLC listed Jake as president and both my parents as partners. The timeline suggests they knew the termination was coming and prepared for it. The business entity was clearly designed to hold property, specifically property they didn't yet own. Digging deeper into email records subpoenaed from the financial advisor they'd mentioned, Chen found the smoking gun. A message thread between my parents from 3 months ago discussed their strategy in detail. Dorothy had written, "Emily's always been too naive and eager to please. Once we frame this as helping Jake's children, she won't be able to say no. The house is worth at least $400,000 more than enough to solve everything." Robert's response was even more calculating. "We need to move fast once Jake's situation becomes critical. Em doesn't understand how property transfers work. By the time she realizes the deed won't be coming back, it'll be too late. We've supported her all these years. It's time she gave back." They'd literally planned to steal my inheritance while playing the role of desperate, loving parents. The LLC structure revealed their endgame. Once my deed was transferred to Jake, he would immediately transfer it to the LLC, making recovery nearly impossible. The operating agreement gave my parents equal control, meaning I'd need all 3 signatures to get my property back, something that would never happen. They could then borrow against my house's full value, leaving me with nothing when they inevitably defaulted. Chen also discovered Jake had been making promises to his creditors based on this plan. Text messages to bookies mentioned, "coming into property soon," and "family asset that'll clear everything." He'd essentially pre-spent my house, so confident in their manipulation that he'd given loan sharks a timeline for payment using my home as collateral. Some of these people had already been calling my workplace, which explained the mysterious hang-ups I'd been receiving. The most heartbreaking revelation was that this wasn't their first attempt at such a scheme. Chen found court records showing my parents had tried something similar with Dorothy's sister 15 years ago, attempting to gain control of inheritance money meant for their niece's education. That case had ended with a restraining order and permanent family estrangement. They'd refined their tactics since then, learning from their mistakes. "Your brother's not just desperate, he's dangerous," Chen warned. "These gambling creditors don't care whose name is on the deed. If Jake promised them your house and can't deliver, they might come after you directly. He recommended immediate security measures while we planned our legal response. The fake lawyer letters they'd sent threatening me with familial support obligations were also criminal fraud, adding to the growing list of charges we could file. As I processed this information, I felt a mix of rage and profound sadness. Every family dinner, every birthday card, every seemingly normal interaction had been with people capable of such calculated cruelty. They'd looked at me and seen not a daughter or sister, but a resource to be exploited when the time came. The facade of family had been maintained only as long as they thought they might need something from me someday. Armed with evidence of my family's fraudulent scheme, Attorney Chen developed a comprehensive legal strategy. "First we protect you, then we go on the offensive," he explained. We filed for emergency restraining orders against Jake, my parents, and even Brittany, given her harassment and use of the children as emotional weapons. The judge, after reviewing the evidence of coordinated harassment and fraud, granted temporary orders immediately. I installed a comprehensive security system at Chen's insistence with cameras covering every angle of my property. The investment proved wise almost immediately. Just 2 nights after installation, the cameras captured Jake attempting to break into my mailbox at 3 a.m. He was clearly looking for bank statements or any documents related to the house deed. When he couldn't get in, he tried to peer through my windows, checking if any important papers were visible inside. The footage became crucial evidence when my parents hired a sketchy attorney named Roger Fleming to escalate their legal threats. Fleming sent a series of intimidating letters claiming I owed Jake financial support under obscure family maintenance laws. The letters were full of legal-sounding nonsense, but designed to scare someone without legal representation. Chen responded with a devastating cease and desist letter that not only refuted their claims, but revealed our knowledge of their LLC fraud scheme. Any further attempts to coerce, threaten, or defraud my client will result in immediate criminal charges. Chen wrote, "We have documented evidence of conspiracy to commit property fraud, harassment, and attempted theft. Additionally, Mr. Jake Mitchell's termination for embezzlement and subsequent promises to creditors regarding property he does not own constitute wire fraud." The response was immediate and panicked. Jake showed up at my workplace the next day, despite the restraining order. He looked terrible, unshaven and wild-eyed, clutching a wrinkled suit jacket. Security intercepted him in the lobby as he loudly proclaimed he just needed 5 minutes to explain everything. "She's my sister. This is all a misunderstanding, Emily. Please, they're going to hurt me if I don't pay them." His desperation was real, but it was a consequence of his own choices, not my responsibility to fix. My boss, who'd been incredibly supportive once I explained the situation, had security escort Jake out and filed a formal trespass warning with the police. The violation of the restraining order added another charge to our growing list. That evening, Chen called with an update. "Jake's getting desperate. My investigator says he's been trying to borrow money from anyone who will listen, claiming he'll have a major asset soon." The next manipulation attempt came through my best friend, Sarah. She called, sounding uncomfortable, asking if we could meet for coffee. I suspected my family had gotten to her, but agreed to meet in a public place. Sure enough, she'd been contacted by Dorothy with a sob story about family misunderstandings and how I was being influenced by a predatory lawyer. She seemed so genuine, Emily. She cried about losing her daughter over pride. I showed Sarah the emails discussing their plan to steal my house, and her expression shifted from concern to horror. Things escalated when Brittany, in a move that shocked even Chen, filed a false CPS report, claiming I was an unfit guardian during family visits. She alleged I'd been drunk during the children's last visit and had made inappropriate comments about their father. The social worker who investigated found the claims completely baseless, especially since I hadn't seen the children in months and never babysat them alone. The false report backfired spectacularly, as it's a crime to knowingly file false allegations. Chen began preparing multiple lawsuits, defamation for the social media campaigns, and false mental health allegations, harassment for the coordinated pressure campaign, attempted fraud for the deed transfer scheme, and intentional infliction of emotional distress for using the children as weapons. We have enough to not only protect your assets but potentially recover damages, he explained. The paper trail my family had created in their confidence was now their biggest liability. During discovery preparations, we found even more disturbing evidence. My parents had taken out multiple loans against their house, far more than just helping Jake. They'd been funding his gambling habit for years, enabling his addiction while mortgaging their own future. Their retirement accounts were empty, credit cards maxed out. The entire family was in a financial death spiral, and they'd seen my inherited house as their life raft. Jake's former employer reached out through Chen, interested in our evidence. Apparently, Jake had claimed his family was pressuring him to steal, setting up a defense that blamed everyone but himself. When they learned about the premeditated LLC scheme, they realized his theft had been funding gambling long before any family pressure existed. This strengthened their criminal case against him significantly. The loan sharks Jake owed began approaching my workplace and home despite our security measures. Chen worked with police to document these incidents, building a case that Jake had essentially ordered harassment of me by promising them my property. One particularly aggressive creditor actually thanked me for the security footage, sarcastically noting they now knew exactly who'd been lying to them about imminent payment. As our legal response took shape, my family's united front began to crumble. Brittany hired her own attorney when she realized the CPS fraud charge could affect her custody rights. Jake and my parents turned on each other, each trying to shift blame for the failed scheme. Dorothy accused Robert of pushing too hard, while he blamed her for raising Jake to be entitled. Jake insisted his parents had masterminded everything, that he was just trying to save his family. Chen prepared our final strategic move, a comprehensive letter, detailing all potential criminal charges and civil liabilities, along with an offer. If they ceased all contact permanently and provided written admissions of their fraudulent scheme, we would consider not pursuing criminal charges, though civil lawsuits for damages would proceed. This gives them a choice, Chen explained: admit guilt and minimize damage, or face the full consequences of their actions. As Chen finalized our legal strategy, he decided to do one more thorough review of all documents related to my grandmother's estate. Sometimes in complex family property disputes, there are details everyone overlooks, he explained. What he found while examining the original will and trust documents would become the turning point that exposed the true depth of my family's betrayal and stupidity. "Emily, you need to see this," Chen said, his voice carrying an unusual mix of amazement and amusement. He pointed to a section of the trust agreement I'd never paid attention to, written in my grandmother's careful handwriting and witnessed by 3 attorneys. "Your grandmother was a very smart woman. She included what's called a restraint on alienation clause, specifically for the house she left you." The clause read, "The residential property located at 42 Maple Street shall remain with Emily Catherine Mitchell for a period of not less than 10 years from the date of transfer. Any attempt to sell, transfer deed, or otherwise alienate said property within this time frame shall result in immediate reversion of the property to the Mitchell Family Charitable Trust, to be liquidated with proceeds benefiting the Children's Hospital of Birmingham." My hands shook as I read it again. So, even if I wanted to transfer the deed to Jake, Chen finished my thought, "the moment you signed it over, the house would automatically go to charity. Your brother would get nothing, and you'd lose everything. Your grandmother made it legally impossible for anyone to pressure you into giving up your inheritance. The 10-year period wouldn't end for another 5 years. But wait," I said, a horrible realization dawning. My parents were the executors of her estate. They had to have known about this clause. Chen nodded grimly. "Not only did they know, they were legally required to inform you of all restrictions on the property. Look here." He showed me the estate settlement documents where my parents had signed affidavits stating they'd explained all terms to me. They'd deliberately withheld this crucial information. The revelation got worse. Chen found correspondence between my parents and an estate attorney from 6 months after my grandmother's death. They'd consulted about breaking the restraint clause, exploring every possible loophole. The attorney's response was blunt. "The clause is ironclad. Mrs. Mitchell Sr. clearly anticipated potential family pressure on Emily and took steps to prevent it. Any attempt to circumvent this restriction would be fraudulent and would trigger the automatic transfer to charity. So they'd known for 5 years that their plan was impossible. Yet they'd proceeded anyway. They were hoping you didn't know about the clause and would sign the transfer, Chen explained. Once you'd signed and the house went to charity, they planned to claim you'd acted without their knowledge, then contest the will claiming your grandmother was mentally incompetent when she added the restriction. I found more evidence in the documents notes from a meeting between Jake and a shady lawyer who specialized in breaking trusts. The consultation happened just weeks before his job loss, confirming this had all been orchestrated. The lawyer had told Jake the same thing: the clause couldn't be broken. Jake's handwritten notes from the meeting showed his desperation. Must find another way. Parents insist Emily will cave under pressure. Chen laughed the same laugh that had started this whole revelation. Your family spent months planning to steal something that couldn't be stolen. They destroyed their relationships, potentially face criminal charges, and ruined their own financial futures over a legal impossibility. Your grandmother outsmarted them from beyond the grave. But the story wasn't done. Further investigation revealed why my grandmother had been so protective. Chen found documents from 25 years ago showing my parents had tried to pressure her into early inheritance distribution when Jake was in college. They'd wanted her to mortgage her house to pay for Jake's expensive private university while I attended community college on scholarships. She'd refused, and they'd retaliated by limiting her access to grandchildren. My grandmother's personal notes filed with her attorney painted a clear picture. Dorothy and Robert see family as a resource to be exploited. They've already made clear that Jake matters more than Emily. I fear what they'll do to her when I'm gone. This house will be her security, her freedom from their manipulation. They must never be able to take it from her. She'd actually consulted with 3 different attorneys to make sure the protection was complete. One note read, "Explained situation to attorneys. All agree the charity reversion clause is the strongest protection. Even if Emily is pressured into agreeing, the house will go to good use, rather than feeding their greed." She'd literally gamed out every scenario, anticipating exactly what my family would try. Chen discovered that my grandmother had left detailed instructions with her attorney to be given to me if I ever faced family pressure about the house. The attorney had retired, and his practice had closed, so the letter had never reached me. But his files, now digitized and archived, contained her message: "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, your family has shown their true colors. Know that I've protected you as best I could. The house is yours, and only yours. Let them exhaust themselves against walls I've built. Live free, my dear one." The depth of forethought was staggering. She'd even included provisions that if my parents contested the will, or tried to have her declared incompetent posthumously, their own small inheritance would be revoked and added to my trust. They'd receive $20,000 each from her estate. Attempting to break my protection would cost them that too. Every angle had been considered, every manipulation anticipated. Your grandmother basically built a legal fortress around your inheritance, Chen marveled. I've never seen anything quite like it. She must have really understood your family's nature. I thought about all the times she'd warned me to be independent, to never let family pressure compromise my security. I'd thought she was just being cautiously supportive. Now I realized she'd been preparing me for exactly this situation. The final document Chen found was a letter to my parents in my grandmother's handwriting, dated just months before her death. "I know what you're planning. It won't work. Emily's inheritance is protected from your schemes. If you truly love your daughter, you'll let her live in peace. If you only see her as a resource, you'll discover I've made that impossible. Choose wisely." They'd received this warning and ignored it completely. Chen drafted a formal letter to my family revealing the existence of the restraint clause and my grandmother's protective measures. "We need to let them know their entire scheme was doomed from the start," he explained. "This should end their harassment immediately, as there's literally nothing to gain." The letter detailed the automatic charity reversion, included copies of the relevant documents, and pointed out that as executors, my parents had always known about these restrictions. I was in Chen's office when he sent the certified letters. Within 2 hours, my phone exploded with calls and texts. I didn't answer, but the voicemails Jake left painted a picture of complete meltdown. His first message was incoherent screaming. The second, slightly more coherent, revealed his desperation. "You knew! You had to have known! Why did you let us go through all this if you knew it was impossible? You're sick. Emily's sick." My mother's voicemail was calculatingly cold. "We demand you meet with us and our attorney to discuss breaking your grandmother's restrictive clause." She was clearly not of sound mind when she created these provisions. As her executors, we have rights. The delusion was complete. They still thought they could somehow salvage their scheme. Chen responded formally that any attempt to contest my grandmother's mental capacity would result in immediate criminal fraud charges for their conspiracy. The family meltdown accelerated when Brittany, through her attorney, received full disclosure about Jake's gambling debts and the failed property scheme. She filed for divorce within days, seeking emergency custody and financial disclosure. Jake called me from different numbers, leaving increasingly desperate messages. "Brittany's leaving me. She's taking the kids. This is all your fault. If you'd just helped when we asked nicely, none of this would have happened." My father's voicemail was perhaps the most revealing. "Your grandmother poisoned you against us. She always favored you, always protected you. We're your parents. We deserve respect and support. We'll contest every word of that will. You'll spend more in legal fees than the house is worth." The threat might have scared me before, but Chen had already assured me that any will contest would be immediately dismissed given their prior knowledge and agreement as executors. The complete collapse came when Jake's loan sharks learned about the failed scheme. With no property transfer coming, they accelerated their collection efforts. Jake appeared at my door at 2 a.m., pounding and screaming despite the restraining order. "They're going to kill me. Emily, I need money now. Give me anything. Please." The security footage showed him wild-eyed and disheveled, clearly in fear for his safety. Police arrested him for violating the protective order. From jail, Jake made his one phone call to me. I shouldn't have answered, but some part of me needed to hear what he'd say. "I know you hate me," he began, "but I'm your brother. They said they'll hurt Mom and Dad too. I told them about the house to buy time. Can't you at least get a loan against it?" Even facing real danger, he was still trying to manipulate me into circumventing the protections my grandmother had put in place. "The house would go to charity if I tried," I reminded him. "Grandma made sure of that." His response was vitriolic. "That old witch, she turned you against us from the start. We should have put her in a home and taken power of attorney when we had the chance." The mask had completely fallen. This wasn't about family helping family. It had always been about taking what they thought they deserved. My parents' house went into foreclosure the following week. They'd leveraged everything trying to cover Jake's debts and fund their scheme against me. Their retirement was gone, credit destroyed. They sent one last manipulative letter through their attorney. "Our daughter has allowed us to become homeless while sitting in comfort. We request she allow us to move into her inherited property temporarily." Chen responded that any attempt to approach my property would result in their arrest. Extended family members who'd shunned me began reaching out with apologies as the truth spread. My cousin Marie personally called about the wedding. "Emily, I'm so sorry. They told us you were keeping Jake's children from their home out of spite. We had no idea about the gambling or the deed scheme. Please forgive me." Some relationships could be salvaged, but the damage was real. Trust once broken isn't easily repaired. Jake's embezzlement case moved forward with his former employer adding charges based on the evidence we'd uncovered. He faced serious prison time. His attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, reaching out to Chen to see if I'd provide a character reference. "He wants you to tell the court that family pressure drove him to steal," Chen explained, incredulous. Even facing prison, Jake couldn't take responsibility for his own choices. My parents, now living with distant relatives who barely tolerated them, made one final attempt at manipulation. They had their pastor call me claiming they were elderly parents abandoned by their only daughter. I sent the pastor the full documentation of their fraud scheme, including their own emails planning to steal my home. He called back mortified, apologizing for being used as a flying monkey and offering me counseling to deal with such a toxic family. The last I heard, Jake had been sentenced to 3 years in prison with restitution requirements that would follow him for life. His gambling debts remained, and without family resources to exploit, he faced dangerous consequences upon release. Brittany had moved out of state with the children starting fresh where the scandal couldn't follow. My parents lived in a small apartment dependent on Social Security, their golden years destroyed by their own greed. The extended family fractured completely. Those who'd participated in the harassment faced their own consequences as social media posts and messages became evidence in civil lawsuits. The family reunions, holiday gatherings, and birthday celebrations that had once seemed so important revealed themselves as performances held together only by the potential for financial gain. Without money to chase, the family scattered like leaves in the wind. 6 months after that day in Attorney Chen's office when his laughter revealed my grandmother's final protection, I sat in my therapist's office processing the trauma of complete family betrayal. Dr. Martinez specialized in family trauma and financial abuse survivors. "What you experienced wasn't just betrayal," she explained. "It was a form of psychological warfare designed to break down your boundaries and sense of self-worth. Through therapy, I learned to recognize the patterns of manipulation I'd been subjected to my entire life." The golden child scapegoat dynamic between Jake and me hadn't started with the house situation. It had been carefully cultivated since childhood. Every family gathering where Jake's achievements were celebrated, while mine were ignored every time I was told to be satisfied with less because Jake needed more, had been training me to eventually hand over my inheritance without question. I discovered my grandmother's journals in a safety deposit box she'd left me with instructions to open them only if I ever needed to understand why she'd protected me so fiercely. Her words revealed decades of similar treatment. She'd been the family resource expected to provide money for everyone else's dreams while her own were dismissed. She'd broken free only by cutting contact for years, returning only when she learned about my situation. I see myself in Emily. One entry read, "She has the same generous heart they'll exploit, and the same blind spot about family obligation. I wasn't strong enough to protect myself until it was almost too late. I can give her what I wished someone had given me: unbreakable protection and the truth about who these people really are." She'd spent her final years planning every detail of my defense against family greed. The decision to sell the house and move across the country wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The memories tainted every room, every view reminded me of Jake pounding on the door, or my parents dumping my childhood things on the lawn. I found a buyer who loved the garden my grandmother and I had planted together, promising to tend it with care. The sale price, even after taxes and moving costs, gave me enough to start fresh. I chose Denver, a city where nobody knew my family drama, where I could build a life based on my own choices rather than inherited obligations. The job market in my field was strong, and I quickly found a position with a tech company that valued my skills and experience. My new colleagues knew me only as Emily, the marketing analyst, not Emily, the ungrateful daughter or selfish sister. Building new friendships required learning to trust again. I joined a hiking club, started taking pottery classes, and slowly opened up to people who demonstrated consistent respect for boundaries. My friend group included Anna from pottery, who'd escaped her own toxic family, Marcus from work, who understood choosing career over family pressure, and Susan from hiking, who'd rebuilt her life after financial abuse by her ex-husband. Thanksgiving that year, instead of the tense family performance I'd endured for decades, I hosted a Friendsgiving in my Denver apartment. 8 people who'd become my chosen family gathered around my table, sharing food and gratitude without manipulation or hidden agendas. We toasted to freedom, to choices, to families we create rather than those we're born into. It was the first holiday in my life where I felt genuinely grateful. The flying monkeys still occasionally appeared. Distant relatives who'd gotten my new contact information would reach out with updates clearly designed to guilt me into reconnecting. Your mother's health is failing. Jake's children ask about you. The family needs healing. I'd learned to recognize these as manipulation tactics rather than genuine concern. My standard response became a polite but firm statement that I wished them well, but had moved on. I started volunteering with a financial literacy program for young adults, teaching them about protecting assets and recognizing financial manipulation. Many had their own stories of family members who felt entitled to their success. We discussed setting boundaries, the importance of legal protection, and how to recognize when family love comes with a price tag. Sharing my grandmother's wisdom helped others avoid similar traps. One evening, while organizing old photos, I found one of my grandmother and me in her garden. Her knowing smile now made perfect sense. She'd given me more than a house. She'd given me freedom from the cycle of exploitation that had trapped her for so long. I framed the photo and hung it in my new living room, a daily reminder that true love protects rather than exploits. A year after the complete family estrangement, I received a letter forwarded by Chen. My mother had written asking for forgiveness, claiming she'd been influenced by others and hadn't meant for things to go so far. The letter was textbook manipulation, taking no real responsibility, shifting blame and ending with a request for financial assistance. I filed it with the other documentation evidence of patterns that never change. I'd found peace in the distance, both physical and emotional. My life in Denver flourished: promotion at work, genuine friendships, a loving relationship with someone who understood my past, but didn't define me by it. The house my grandmother left me had been sold, but her true gift remained the knowledge that I deserved protection, that family bonds aren't license for exploitation, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is build walls against those who would tear us down. During my last therapy session with Dr. Martinez, she asked what I'd learned from the experience. That my grandmother's greatest gift wasn't the house. I replied. It was showing me that I'm worth protecting. That family isn't about blood or obligation, but about mutual respect and genuine care. And sometimes the only way to win against manipulators is to make it impossible for them to succeed. I raised a glass that evening to grandmother's wisdom, to Attorney Chen's revelation, and to the laughter that had unveiled a protection so complete it turned my family's greed into their own downfall. Some would say I lost my family, but I'd argue I finally saw them clearly. In that clarity, I found freedom, and in that freedom, I built a life truly worth living. Thank you for joining me on this journey of family betrayal, legal protection, and ultimate freedom. If you've experienced family members trying to exploit your success or inheritance, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you protect yourself from those who saw your achievements as their opportunity? Please hit that like button if you believe families should support, not exploit each other, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming manipulation and building lives of genuine connection. Share this story with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to protect themselves from toxic family members. Until next time, remember, true family respects your boundaries, and real love never comes with a price tag.